Hello again, my friends. So, we are gradually building the parts of our project, right? Last lesson, we wrote the HTML code for the header section. But have a look at this here. This is the final version, or what the page is going to look like. So, there are a few differences between the two styles, the one that we want and the one that we currently have. So, in the last lesson, we said that we're going to create our CSS file and make some changes there. So, this is what we're going to shoot for by making changes to our file. So that means that I want to show you how to create our CSS file in this lesson. So to do all that, let's just right-click on this folder and we'll create a new file named style.css. Now, before I forget, I'll add this CSS file to our HTML file with the link tag. Now, that's really important to note here. We've got to add this link tag after adding Bootstrap CSS because the changes in Bootstrap will be loaded first, then the changes that we prepared. Get it? So we've got to pay attention to the order. That's all. All right. So now that we've created our CSS file, we can make our style changes. As you see here, I do want to make this border in the navigation section. Now we used the navbar class when we created it, so I'm going to write .navbar in the CSS file. And here I just have to use the border bottom property because I want the border in the bottom section. And then I can use this color and solid line. And boom, there's our border. But don't you think we're going to want a slightly thicker line so that we can see that delineation more clearly? So if you want it to be larger, we just change its thickness again. Now, of course, I want to change the color of the Bootstrap text here. And we use the navbar brand class. Now, if you don't remember which class elements you use, you don't have to worry about that because we have the opportunity to examine the codes just by right-clicking on Chrome and saying Inspect. So here we can have a look at the element that we want to see in the section that says Elements. And when we get to where we want, we can already see that section, and we can see which code in which file and in which line. Now when we look at the Bootstrap section in here, we see the navbar brand class. Now, of course, there's another way. I can look at this section that says Bootstrap in our HTML file and see that the navbar brand class is here. And now we can change the color of this post in our CSS file. So I want to make the font size a little bit bigger. So let's look at the changes. And yeah, size has grown, but the color has not changed. So why do you suppose that happened? Because here we use the Bootstrap class, and codes written in Bootstrap dominate any codes that we write. And that means any Bootstrap style changes will persist. Of course, it doesn't mean that we won't be able to make the changes that we want. You just got to know where to look. So let's have a look at which class was used before this navbar brand class. And we see navbar class is used here. So while writing the class name in our CSS file, we first write .navbar and then .navbar brand. So here we say to make those changes to the navbar brand class within the navbar class. All right, so that way we make the place where we want to make the changes more specific. And that makes the change that we want. Now, secondly, we got to write important next to the code that we want to make the change in. So when we have a look at that, that's how we see the color that we want. So in other words, we've stated that this code that we wrote here will have priority, and then the change that we want is realized. Okay? So now it's time for the links here. So I want these links to look a little cleaner, I guess. So I'll write .nav link in our CSS file. And I'll write text transform uppercase for all these letters to be uppercase. And I'll want the border color to appear when we hover over these links. To do that, you just give the hover feature to this class. So I'll add this color as a color again. So now when I look at the changes, all the letters are big, but we're also having color problems, right? That's right. So we can just write important next to this code. And sure enough, when you look at it now, there's our nifty color effect. All right, so now it's time to add the background color to the header section. So I downloaded the image that I used here to the images folder that we created earlier. You can, of course, add a photo that you want to, either with this method, or you can download the folder in GitHub that I prepared for you and use the files easily from there. All right, so let's add the background now. And for this, I'm looking at the ID that the header section uses in our HTML file. And I'll just put the # in our CSS file and write the ID. And I'll write background and write the image address with a URL and as images header bg.jpg. And I'll write no repeat so that the image does not repeat. I can write cover for my background size. And let's have a look at the changes. So the background comes up, but the height doesn't fill the entire screen. So I'll write height 100. So here I'll say maximize the screen. And yes, there are the changes. But the articles that we added here are not clearly visible. So why don't we take this section a little higher so that we get a better view? And we'll change the height value that we give the H1 in the HTML file. So if you recall, we didn't prepare our CSS file while preparing the header section. We wrote the style changes for H1 in our HTML file, but now our CSS file is ready, and I want to write these style variables there. So I'll write H1 in our CSS file, and I'll give the margin top value to be 20. And there you go. That looks a lot better. So yeah, that's enough for this. Review something if you don't get it. And in this lesson, we created our CSS file, and we have customized the features that come along with our Bootstrap for ourselves. So play around, see what you can do. That's how you create differences. That's how you create differences when using Bootstrap. So long for now. I'll see you in the next lesson.